Welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches. I'm Pete McConville and Merry Christmas to all of you. It is Christmas Day as I record this. I'm in a very narrow window between opening the presents and Christmas morning with the family and sitting down for lunch later in the day. I'm going to squeeze out a very quick video in the meantime. Now, warning, many of you don't like it when it's just me talking to camera, and you're going to get a lot of that today. I can squeeze out some time to record. I'm not going to be able to get a couple of hours to sit down and edit locked away in my own room between now and the foreseeable future, it feels like. So if you don't like me just talking to the camera, switch off now, move on, and I'll catch you later. Okay, so now what I'm going to talk about today is the ETA COMCO imbroglio, and in particular the recent statement by COMCO, which is foreshadowing that it may forbid ETA from selling movements to third-party producers. This has caught everyone by surprise. It took me a while to figure out because it seems like COMCO have reversed their direction. They've spent the last almost 15 years telling ETA they must provide to the whole industry. Now they're telling them that they can't provide to anyone. What's going on? I think it is actually a very rational move they've taken. I can understand why they've done it, but to get there, I've had to walk through the process quite carefully. I've had to read a lot of annual reports from COMCO, carefully pick through a whole bunch of articles and come up with some ideas. I might still be wrong, but I don't think I am. The other difference in what I'm doing is, unlike a lot of other people which have responded kind of emotionally, as in how dare a regulator, how dare a government tell a private company what they can do, I've spent a lot of my time as a regulator, and so I suppose that means I give them the benefit of the doubt and think that there probably is some method in this apparent madness. As I said, I think there is, and now I'm going to walk through it. Let's go back in time. Swatch Group emerges out of the wreckage of the quartz crisis and the currency crisis and the trade crisis of the 70s, and is backed by a ton of government money and banks and a whole bunch of other things. In that, they sweep up ETA and by default become the primary movement manufacturer of a huge proportion of the Swiss industry. That proceeded okay during the late 80s and 90s, but then as we came up to the 2000s, everyone's kind of got their feet back under them, and Swatch began to think, we're not really that keen on being a commodity provider to the entire industry, we want to back out. And they started making noises in the late 90s that that's what they're going to do, and in 2002 Nicholas Hayek, the CEO of the Swatch Group, announced that that's it, from now on we're not a provider to everyone, we're going to pick and choose our own customers. As you can imagine, the Swiss watch industry kind of lost their crap and went to COMCO and complained. COMCO immediately launched an investigation into seeing whether this was an abuse of market power, determined that it was, and entered into some arrangements with ETA Swatch. Now, COMCO is an independent regulator, which means they have to publish annual reports, which means their decisions for the previous year and their plans for the next year have to be written down. And they are. COMCO publishes their annual reports on their website. Those reports are in English, so they can be read by me and most of my viewers. And at the same time, unfortunately, they only go back to 2010. But that first report in 2010 does give us some insight into what has happened previously. So in that report, they mention the amicable undertaking that ETA Swatch ETA was forced to go into back in 2004. They mentioned the fact that this amicable undertaking was required to go through to 2010, and that this undertaking required Swatch ETA to essentially provide the entire industry with whatever they want. The 2010 report also refers to the fact that COMCO opened an investigation into the Swatch ETA group in 2009 to determine whether they were continuing to abuse their dominant position and what that would mean for the expiration of the amicable agreement then in place that was ending in 2010. That we can pretty much tell what came out of that, because there was another amicable agreement that came later in 2013. Interestingly, there was no plan to enforce that. There was no plan to put that in place. COMCO mentions that they're entering into discussions with Swatch Group and don't plan on taking any actions depending on what Swatch want to do. So there was clearly discussions going on and negotiations to figure something out. And then Swatch essentially went nuke in 2011 and said, that's it, we're done. From now on, we're going to pick and choose our own customers. We're only going to sell to the people that we want to. Now, there was no way that the Swiss watch industry, that COMCO could allow that to occur. Whether we're talking power or finance or insurance or internet access or telecommunications, no government allows dominant industries to exclude others from the marketplace. And so it should come as zero surprise that COMCO didn't allow that. They clearly did something behind the scenes to prevent that from moving forward, and it resulted in another year or two of negotiations with a 2013 amicable agreement between COMCO and SWATCH-ETA for SWATCH-ETA to continue to provide movements to the Swiss watch industry at a specified number for another 6 years until 2019. If you look at the annual reports from COMCO between 2010 and 2018, you see this constant reference to the SWATCH-ETA group. It will not go away. There are investigations virtually every year into movement availability, service part availability, differential and discriminatory pricing, differential and discriminatory delivery, and there's never a resolution. There's never a yep, that's it, we're done now, nothing more to see. There's always ongoing discussions. So this is clearly something that the SWATCH-ETA group is really rankled by. They don't want to do it. There's a reference in 2016, I think, that they're trying to get out of it and change the agreement. It's just clearly never gone away. Swatch does not want to be in this position of having to supply the entire industry, and they're pushing the boundaries the whole way. And then in 2018, the COMCO annual report records that they're opening an investigation to look at the ongoing position of SWATCH-ETA as the dominant provider of watch movements to third parties in the Swiss watch industry, with a view to the expiration of the 2013 deal to see what's going to happen next. And they discuss in there again that they're going to be opening talks with Swatch. Now, this is important because it really puts some of the discussion that Swatch comes later, like last week, into some sort of focus. So what that means is way back in 2018, COMCO saw today and recorded that they were going to start discussions with Swatch. So in December 2019, that deal expired. There is no other deal in place. Theoretically, SWATCH-ETA can now do whatever they want. They can provide to anyone they want or not. And I think that last part is the thing that's changed, and that's why COMCO has decided to take the action that it has of forbidding them from selling to anyone. Not because they don't want SWATCH-ETA selling to anyone, but they're not ready for SWATCH-ETA to pick and choose their customers. Because remember, that's always been the argument. We talk about the fact, why should Swatch provide their competitors' movements? I think Swatch is actually perfectly comfortable providing some people movements, but they just want to be able to say who and when and where and under what conditions. And we're going to talk about what their preferences are now and why I think that's led to this decision, this apparently paradoxical decision from COMCO. And in understanding that paradox, or that apparent paradox of COMCO now telling telling SWATCH-ETA they can't sell to anyone, you've got to pay attention to the real details and say it doesn't say you can't sell to anyone. It says that you can't sell to anyone that isn't a small to medium enterprise. Now, I don't know exactly what COMCO defines as an SME, but I'm going to go with it, probably uses something akin to the OECD number, which is essentially 250 employees, turnover of less than, normally it's around about 50 million euro a year. So to put that in perspective, what are we talking about? We're talking about companies like Sinn with 100 employees, bell&ross with 125 employees, Carlef Buchera with maybe 200, and topping out at something like Maurice Lacroix at 250 employees. That's the ceiling of a small to medium enterprise. So we're talking about people producing 10 to 30,000 watches a year. Now, looking at the Swatch reply to this, they are apoplectic about this. They make three key points in this decision. The first is that ETA is no longer the market leader in the provision of third-party movements. That Sellita makes 1 million movements a year, which is almost twice as many as SWATCH-ETA can, and that the market no longer needs SWATCH-ETA because the Sellita's really picked up that and run with it, and is in fact in danger of becoming a monopoly if SWATCH-ETA is forbidden from being involved in the third-party movement game. So that's what Swatch sees as the outcome of this, but their real complaints, what makes them so angry about this is A, that this really cements Sellita as a dominant player. Frankly, I don't think they care that much about that. They talk about the timing and they say that this is really late in the day and that no one can shift this fast. I'll reply, these discussions opened 1.5 years ago. We only can have got to this point if those discussions have clearly gone nowhere and Swatch, despite everything that would have happened in the back door or behind closed doors, has decided they are not going to play. So this isn't a surprise to Swatch. It's the announcement has caught them. But it's the next two complaints from Swatch that I think are the most illustrative, and that is that the SME carve-out is effectively impossible to manage and ineffective, that it's a pointless carve-out because, for whatever reason, they don't actually say why, but I think I can work that out. And the second, their final complaint, is that this is COMCO making policy to reshape the Swiss watch industry. And in there, I suspect that there's some clues to what COMCO has discussed behind closed doors and what they would like to see happen. So what's going on? Now, it's funny because I'm about to mention a brand that's a favorite of mine that I talk about a lot on this channel, and I kind of feel a bit uncomfortable that I'm going to bring it up again. I think this is actually all about Breitling. More than anything else, there's probably a few other whales in there like Tudor and Chopard, but primarily this is about Breitling. Okay, so let's go back and have a look at the Swatch figures, because I'm reasonably comfortable that when we're talking about numbers, they're probably right. They're saying that Sellita makes about 1 million movements a year, and they're saying that that's twice what SWATCH-ETA makes. So that means that SWATCH-ETA is punching out around about 500,000 movements for third-party use annually. Now, figures vary a little bit on Breitling's output, but some with a low of around about 500,000 units, a high of around about 700,000 units. Let's split the difference and call it 600,000 units. Now, Breitling has been using a lot more of its collab movements with Tudor, and it's got its own in-house chronographs. However, they tend to be in the most expensive, variants, and don't turn up in your garden variety Super Oceans and Colts and Avengers. So Breitling putting out around about 600,000 watches a year. 2/3 of them are going to be based on a SWATCH-ETA movement. So that means Breitling hoover up around about 400,000 units a year, movements a year from SWATCH-ETA. Now remember, SWATCH-ETA are only making about 500,000 units a year available to the Swiss watch market. So Breitling sucking up the vast bulk of that, and the other 100,000, 150 odd thousand units are now being spread across dozens, if not hundreds of smaller brands. Yes, some of them are as big as Bell&Ross or Maurice Lacroix or Carl F. Bucherer, but then on the other hand, some of them are as small as Ming and very small little companies. And that's an administrative burden that Swatch just doesn't want. They just don't want to be having to manage that. And if you listen to, say, Nick from Fierce Watches, who was interviewed, I can't remember, it was on the Scottish Watches podcast or the 10 and 2 podcast, but he talks about the difficulty in dealing with Swatch, or more to the point, not dealing with Swatch. How Swatch have no interest in dealing in smaller manufacturers, and invariably you have to get all your stuff through sort of these third-party vendors or third-hand brokers. So let's go back and see why Swatch calls that SME carve-out as unfeasible. Because suddenly what it means is they're only going to be selling about 100,000 watches a year, 100,000 movements a year. They're going to 1,000,001 small companies, which Swatch hates doing anyway. They're going to lose a great chunk of money from not being able to sell to Breitling, and they're going to not make much because the administrative overhead of having to put in place a proper customer relationship deal or a customer supplier arrangement is not something they want to do. So for them, this SME carve out is truly unviable. And as I said, they lose their cash cow, which is just probably 2 Descos who do nothing but sell 400,000 movements a year to a single buyer. So how great is that for them? And I think that now tells us what this COMCO action is all about. I think COMCO figured out that as of next year, effectively SWATCH-ETA would provide Breitling, maybe Tudor, maybe Chopin, maybe 1 or 2 other whales, their movements, but everyone else was going to be left to fend for themselves. Every other company out there that relies on those other 100-odd thousand movements a year was just going to be left high and dry, and Swatch couldn't have cared less. And so what's happened here is COMCO's gone nuclear and said, right, if that's your idea, then we're not going to let you sell to anyone. So a quick recap. So what I think is happening here is that SWATCH-ETA is threatening to pull the pin on supplying around about 100,000 movements to small to medium enterprises, putting the continued existence of companies from as big as Carl F. Bucherer to as small as Ming out of business. They don't think that's a big deal. For them, 100,000 movements a year won't shift the needle on their annual report. No harm, no foul, and it makes life a lot easier for them moving forward. COMCO has said you're not going to be allowed to do that. If you make that choice, you're going to lose your whales like Breitling, and you are going to suffer pain. I think the outcome will be one of 3 things. The most likely outcome will be a bit of stasis for a while as everyone's kind of figuring out what's going on. I think the next option would be that it's extremely unlikely, but that they could actually be forced to divest a chunk of that facility and make it available for purchase to Solita or Soprod or Swiss Tech or someone else. I think that's not likely, but it is doable, and it could be a path forward. I think the least likely, but possibly available option would be Swatch simply puts their hand up and says, fine, we'll do it, and stops supplying that. Takes a massive hit from not selling that 500,000 movements a year, but gambles that it can claw back some of that revenue via legal action. Yes, it would take a monstrous reputational hit, but they might feel that they can weather that storm. I think that's very unlikely, but it could happen. So anyway, I'm Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watches, and that's my take on the whole ETA COMCO thing. What are your thoughts? Put them in the comments below. Again, I apologize for an awful lot of talking to camera, very little, if any, graphics, but it's the Christmas season and sacrifices must be made. Thanks very much. Bye.